Max, speaking of those sessions, can I please ask you to step up to the stage with me, please?
Hello, how are you doing?
Hey, Max, great and you.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks. Yeah, it's been a longish week, but it's been very successful. We got a couple of senior leadership over here from States now that travel's open. So it's been a good week.
Amazing. Amazing. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you so much for taking time out of your wild diary to be here with us. It's a big privilege to have you. Guys, Max is the Director of Finance and the Assistant Global Controller for a company called Impact. If you guys haven't had a look at them yet, impact.com is the site. When we started working with Impact about 2 years ago, their numbers were around the 500 people around the world, and they are just about to cross the 1,000 mark if I look at LinkedIn. So it's a mid-sized organization based out in the States that has business all over the world, that's growing at lightning speed, and the environment is so interesting and so complex, and there's so many things to think of. We thought having Max speak to us about how do you manage the finance in an organization like this would be so interesting. Max, over to you.
Thanks, Lo. Yeah, it's certainly been a crazy ride here at Impact, but it's really fascinating and learn something new every day. So thanks so much for inviting me here. I'm happy that I can share hopefully some useful tips for those of you who are working on high growth organizations and the financial elements that go with that. So just a bit of background. So I did my articles at Deloitte in Durban. I was also manager there for 3 years. I was also then fortunate enough to spend 8 years in London with 3 different high growth organizations ranging from 40 to $350 million of turnover. Returned to SA in March last year and straight into lockdown, but was lucky enough to join Impact in June. As Lo said, they are a high growth company. We're a SaaS company which provides a partnership management platform. Cape Town is actually their biggest office. It is a center of excellence for a number of functions, including finance. And yeah, we're going through a fascinating time at the moment. So just to share a couple of highlights with you. So when in my last role in London, I started trying to formulate my own personal philosophy on building a finance team, specifically focused on high growth companies. So a key operational requirement for finance is that we must add value to any organization. I'm passionate about finance. I never want to be seen as a back office function. I don't like to use that word. I want to make sure that the finance function is adding significant value into whatever organization it's a part of. This should extend far beyond transactional reporting and compliance to detailed analysis of trends, competitor analysis, funding decisions, valuations. But this can only be achieved if the foundations of the entire information chain have been soundly built and the accuracy of the inputs ensured. So as a finance team, our objective should always be to move up the financial reporting pyramid, as I call it, from transactional level reporting to operational, tactical, and then to the strategic level, where you're adding the maximum value to any organization. But as I said, you can't move up that chain until the foundations have been set. You know, you're reporting, if you went out for a funding round, the data, the reports that you put out to the funder, to the banks, investment banks, is only as good as the data it's a part of. So there's no point putting out that data if no one can rely upon it. Now, how do you work up that different value chain? How do you create that organization? And I believe you have 3 resources at your disposal here: your people, your processes, and your systems. So I'm going to go into a bit more depth about each of those different resources and just try and share some of my learnings with each of you. The first one, which I'm sure you all realize being in business, which is the most important, is the people. There is no way you're going to build a successful financial department without ensuring you have the right people in place. So what does that mean for a high growth company? It is a specific set of skills and personalities which you need to involve. So it's important that during the hiring process, you're looking for certain elements which will key to success. One is that those individuals are agile. Can they think on their feet? Can they pick up certain trends very quickly? Are they able to adapt and change their focus relatively quickly? If they may be perhaps a bit more conservative in their thinking or a bit more structured in their thinking, they may find it difficult to adapt to this high growth, agile environment. Obviously, with that comes an element of problem solving. Because you're encountering new issues which perhaps haven't been raised before, They need to be able to problem solve. And that often requires distilling large amounts of data, being able to see what the issue is, and then addressing that specific issue amongst all the chaos of everything in the background. So that's quite a specific skill which not everyone has perhaps developed. They should be constantly questioning. So as either a finance leader or a business leader, you shouldn't have to constantly remind your staff to question elements. You're in a high growth organization, there's change all around you. What you want is staff who are doing that on their own. They're being proactive. They are asking questions themselves about what they see in front of them. One thing I found as well is that generally when you're hiring for individuals, you should probably look at a slightly more experienced role than you would in a company that is a bit more structured and is a bit more been there a longer time and is a bit more fixed in the way it operates. That's because they need to think in their feet. They need to be able to problem solve. So if you're looking for someone who's straight out articles for a company which is their processes are set, you may need to look for someone that's got a couple of years experience behind them, and they can add that to your organization when they join. Something which I also try and look for is optimists. When you're building an organization, you are, to tell you the truth, constantly failing at certain aspects of what you're doing because you're solving problems, because you are creating infrastructure. So it's good to have optimists around. If you have staff who get bogged down in, not necessarily having the answers right in front of them, it can become a bit of a drain. It's great to have a lot of optimists in the business so that they can keep up that energy and not let, not necessarily solving all the issues right up front get to them. So I think having optimists is quite a nice trait to have in your staff. And then what I mean by getting your hiring plan right is don't look for your immediate needs. Don't plan for the day-to-day. This is something I've learned very recently, especially at Impact, is that, don't build out a traditional hiring plan based on your month-end close or your processes that you see in front of you. If you know that you're going to add 300 heads in the next year, which we're doing at Impact, you need to plan for those different elements. You need to think ahead and say, are we opening up offices in these locations? What kind of resource constraints is that going to have us? And really start to think 6 to 12 months ahead. And if you have the luxury of some funding around you, try and put some of that funding into the finance department to build in additional capacity so that if staff leave or there are other elements you want to do a new funding round or you want to have different acquisitions, you have some capacity in there to address it. So just be flexible on your hiring plans in that aspect. Now, moving on to your processes. This is also something which needs to change. What often happens is that these high growth organizations are owner managed. They might have been doing things a certain way for quite a while. And so inertia becomes the enemy. If you have perhaps staff or processes which have been in place for a long time and have served you in that organization, if you're going to suddenly double in size in a short amount of time, things have to change. Do not just accept the norm and go with what has been done because that's what you've done in the past. You need to be questioning and looking at for efficiencies constantly and making sure that the current processes are fit for purpose going forward. Do you rely on a number of key staff? So again, in an owner-managed business, you build the business up with a certain amount of staff. They might have been with you for a number of years. You rely upon them for certain key elements. You might start to create a weak control environment. It's the same financial staff doing payroll and cash. All those sorts of conflicts of interest, which you learn about in audit and your auditors remind you about constantly. You need to start to look at those risks as the business grows and make sure that you aren't weakening your control environment too much. It also creates a business continuity risk as well. If your key staff are across too many functions and they decide to leave the business, then you are going to compromise your ability to adapt and to service the business. Related to that is, are your processes documented? So as you develop these processes and go through, everything needs to be on paper. It relates to your business continuity risk as well. Because there are perhaps some staff turnover and because things are adapting, it needs to be in writing. Otherwise, if new staff join, you have to spend all of that time trying to teach staff and hand over information in conversations instead of just sending them the documentation and building a control environment off the written word. Are the processes scalable? As you go through high growth, is what you're doing now fit for a company twice your size without employing a finance team twice your size? And then how do you manage the validity, accuracy, and completeness of your data? So looking at your customer master files and data like that. So how are you managing that? Is it in Excel, or do you have proper processes to manage that? And lastly, systems. Sorry, I know we're running short on time, so I'll work through it.
Go for it, Max.
Yeah, but first on systems, this is really why I think when you start to get a bit more mature in your operations, you can get and achieve scale in the business. But Excel is not a system. It's essentially a document to allow you to manage some data. It is not a ERP CPQ system, which allows you to achieve scale and build a control environment around that. When you're implementing new systems, make sure you commit enough resource to ensure a successful implementation, and make sure you do your research beforehand. All the systems look great on a demo as well, but make sure you get in-depth references and validate the system and that partner's performance. This happens time and time again. They come in, they do a demo of the system, it looks fantastic. You sign the scope of work, the sales team disappears, and you're left with an implementation team that's completely new, and things may start to fall apart. So make sure you're committing enough resources both to plan and to implement the system. Look at your master file data. You've got to clean up all your data so that you make sure you're putting in clean data into your systems. Don't put bad data in there, otherwise it becomes useless. You've wasted your time and money. Another item which to be aware of is that a lot of business owners try to think that their finance team can handle the implementation and the maintenance of that system within their normal day-to-day. Finance staff are well trained, and generally we try and do as much as we can, and we work on these systems extensively. We're not specifically trained for the detailed software that is out there now. So advanced ERP systems like Sage, NetSuite, SAP are not able to be run by finance staff. So I would say start simplest is best, and look at a separate finance systems team that can run that for you. I've got a couple of, you got another 2 minutes, or you want me to cut off there?
Go for the 2 minutes. We've got a little bit of fat built in, Max. Thanks.
Sure. So if you're looking at international expansion, this is something just to be aware of. If you're a business owner, there is a lot of complexity around opening up new entities overseas. You're also starting to operate in a control environment which perhaps your finance staff haven't had experience of. So if you're in South Africa, employing South African finance staff, you want to expand and open an office in the US or Singapore or somewhere incredibly complex like Brazil and China, be very aware of the complexity of the statutory environment that you're going into. I would also say outsource for as long as you can. Find good service providers and rely on them. Don't try and build a team from scratch until you have the scale to support them. Another tip is ensure stakeholder management. So ensure your finance team is seen as an integral part of the operations of the business. Don't put them in a back office with the broom closet. Make sure your finance team is on the factory floor, in the sales team, sitting amongst the sales team. Make sure that they understand the business and become integrated into your organization. And then also something which starts to change is as you're growing an organization, a lot of it comes at sales at all costs. You need to start to adapt your approach slightly. So as your risk increases, you need to start including your finance in those discussions to say, what are the implications of these decisions that we're making? Is it scalable? Are we covering our risks? And how does it affect our resourcing decisions down the line? So that, as I said, when you double in size, your finance team doesn't necessarily have to double in size as well. That's the quick and dirty of it for now. If you have any more questions, I'd love to answer them either now, or please feel free to email them through as well.
Thank you, Max. Thanks so much, guys. If you have questions for Max on that, please pop them into the chat and we'll get to them at the end. Max, we're going to move this for the sake of time, but thank you so much for that insight into what it takes to run the finance of a 1,000-man team that is still growing at such a rapid rate. Such a great moment of insight for all the founders building companies that want to ultimately get to that level. So thanks for being here with us.